But for today, I want to talk about the process of Italian unification, and with it also just the notion of nation states in general. Um, Really, when we look at European history, up until the 1860s, there really is no notion of nation state as the ordinary. I mean, we think today as countries, it's a standard notion of countries and identities tied within that our nations and our politics and our people are all somehow there's a common shared identity there. But that wasn't always the case. Up until the 1860s, really England and France were really the only two nation states that we would consider as a modern concept. Most of the nations before that, at that point, are not even nations, they're empires, right? We look at the Austrian Empire, and it's made up of many different ethnic groups that are all living within one area and ruled by one government. Its goal is really more stability and order. And the characteristics of a new nation state are, there's some kind of common cultural or political identity, and with that identity, there's entwined with it maybe a racial descent, which is false. It's an invention that people are believing at the time in the 19th century, or maybe some kind of common history, a common future, perhaps maybe some kind of common potential in the future, a common religion or geographic home, or probably most prevalent there is a common menace. That the us versus them mentality really helps bring people together. The example I like to always think about in Pelham's community is how we can I think back to last year at the Olympics, where that same day where all four classes were so fiercely divided amongst each other during the day, how each class really came together in that. But then that evening when the hockey team was playing against Rye, it was Pelham once again, right? Everyone united together. So it's a nice balance there, as an example, right? That us versus them of who's your menace and how can we unite to prevent that. So how did this change of maps go? I mean, this is the map of Europe in 1815, and here it is in 1914. In 100 years, we see the consolidation of a few new nations, mainly the German Empire and Italy. How do those come about, and why? 19th century really marks a time when the government is recognizing that a new relationship needs to be made between those who are governed and the government. In order for the government to have order over its people, they need to sort of establish a new relationship with the people, particularly after the French Revolution. The people are making demands that won't be fulfilled without some kind of constitution or new institutions implemented. So what occurs is we see this linking and uniting of different originally separate communities to be a larger institution. And then also the government itself will actively try and build new institutions within its society, building things like opening up new political venues for individuals. Even in places like Russia, they start experimenting with local government, like having a mayor in your town where you can sort of serve and participate in civic life in some way. We also see the expansion of education, where more people will be able to read and write and express themselves and expose themselves to new ideas and be educated in law and citizenship and identity in that way. But despite these more peaceful means of unifying, the true unification process is really established through war. Um, in order for the revolutions and the ideals of 1848 to truly be successful, you need to prevent those nations of the Austrian Empire and the empire like a Russia to be broken, so that they can no longer, the Congress of Vienna and the powerhouse that was Austria can no longer prevent and stop these rebellions from occurring, these liberal movements. And then in addition, those smaller states, places like in the German Confederation and those in the Italian Peninsula, they need to be willing to break down, right, and to lose their identity and to blend and become one nation. And that needs to be done by either some kind of overthrow or intimidation. And so the results being that after about 40 years of peace with the Congress of Vienna, we see this period of time of war, starting in 1854 with the war in Crimea, and then we have a war in Italy in 1859, and then we have the three major wars for German unification: the Danish War in 1864, the Austro-Prussian War in 1866, and finally the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. And this period of time from 1854 to 1870 is a period of warfare across Europe, on smaller scales, of course, nothing across the entire nation, not like a Napoleonic War, but we see these wars and violence erupt. And then after 1871, there's another period of over 40 years of peace until World War I. So it is this pattern of like a 40 warfare, 40. Europe in 1914, we see the unification of Germany and Italy, and the weakening of the Ottoman Empire dramatically. You can notice that by the Ottoman Empire gaining all of this, or all of this former land and territory is now new nations. A lot of that occurred with the aid and support of the European countries, who are interested in protecting their Christian allies. We'll talk more about that with the Crimean War. And then the Austro-Hungarian Empire, although still large, is significantly weakened, and it's also Austro-Hungarian rather than the Austrian Empire. Hungary becomes a dual monarchy state. We'll talk about that more in class next week when we get back as well. So let's talk a bit about the Crimean War, which really is the marker to end the Congress system. There were many other moments that we could point to, such as the revolutions of 1848. There were death knells for the Congress system of the Congress of Vienna. But the Crimean War is the first time where the peace established among the different European nations is officially broken, because this becomes a war among European nations. So the Crimean War is fought, and we should all be able to locate Crimea because of the news today, modern news of Russia's interest in Crimea versus the Ukraine. But the cause of the Crimean War is a constant issue that Russia has with the Ottoman Empire. The Black Sea is its major trade port for a warm water port, and access to the Mediterranean Sea. So it's in Russia's interest to have control and greater control of that area. And in this case, it's looking to expand its ports. In addition, Russia had a sense and obligation to protect those Christians in the Ottoman Empire, particularly as we saw with Greeks' independence movement, those who are of Eastern Orthodox descent, and also those in Palestine. Now, not only did the Russians have an interest in Christians in the Ottoman Empire, we also have French claiming some form of protection. For a while now, France has been a major, has been very much involved with Ottoman relations and foreign policy there, and mainly for trade interests. They were the biggest traders in the Middle East and had a very strong presence there. And by the 19th century, France is really considering constructing some kind of Suez Canal. It's not yet constructed, but they are thinking a Suez Canal would be a nice addition to their trading extension there in the Middle East. That the Suez Canal being a canal in Egypt with the Sinai Peninsula. And so war does erupt between the Ottoman Empire and Russia, as it inevitably has done multiple times throughout history. It's a common pattern of Russia and Ottoman Empire going to war. But in this case, the French will join the Ottomans to help protect their interests. And England will also join to maintain the Ottoman Empire as it's existing. It does not want to change that status of the Ottoman Empire. They're afraid of Russia expanding and gaining too much territory or control. They're also reluctant to see France gaining any more trading rights. So for England's sake, it's getting involved in this war to try and stop the rest of the nations benefiting too much. But the Crimean War is a really important war in that it's the first time where the Industrial Revolution is applying to a war effort. And the brutality of the war is photographed, and it's sent back home, and newspapers are present, and it's an information war just as much as any other more modern war. Florence Nightingale is there, and she establishes the Red Cross during the Crimean War. So it has a few different important moments there. But ultimately, the French, the British are both joining the Ottomans and will, of course, then defeat the Russians. But there is one other group that joins this war, which is Sardinia. And Sardinia is this island and kingdom off of Italy, including an area of Piedmont, which is the landed portion of the Italian peninsula. And Piedmont Sardinia joins Britain and France in order to try and get more influence in Italy during the peace negotiations. So the Crimean War is a war of politics and geopolitics, right? A notion of this. So as a result of the war in the Crimean War, it sort of helps cause a spark for Italian unification. So, why wasn't there a united Italy before 1850? Well, primarily it was very much divided since its Middle Ages. There were the different competing city-states and the regions by 1830s in Italy. You have Lombardy and Venetia as one area that was ruled by the Austrians. The Kingdom of Sardinia, which was independent and able to rule itself as an Italian kingdom. Modena and Parma, Tuscany, the Papal States ruled by the Pope himself, and therefore very much protected by a country such as France, whose interest is to maintain the Catholic state there. The Kingdom of Naples, which was ruled by a Bourbon family, so linked with the King of Spain, and Sicily. And so the nations were these different regions that were sort of separated. Now, Sardinia, as I showed here, Piedmont would be this region up here, and Sardinia is this island. That became the new source for this united empire. Since 1848, Piedmont Sardinia ruled as a constitutional monarch under King Victor Emmanuel, and they will be the leaders of the unification movement as a political movement. And it's all led by this man, Camillo Cavour. And Cavour is the prime minister under Victor Emmanuel II. So after the first Victor Emmanuel and constitutional monarchy that's established in 1848, Victor Emmanuel II and Camillo Cavour are going to lead a unification movement that's called the Risorgimento, or the Resurgence. And the idea was, it's very nationalistic. They're trying to reunite Italy to restore that glory that it once had during the ancient Roman times. Cavour himself was a constitutional monarchist. He really believed in progress and moving forward, also in strengthening his own nation and kingdom. He was anti-clerical, as you'll see is a common trend among those who want a united Italy. They're not looking to unite Italy under the Papal States. He believed in very Machiavellian tendencies, very practical. He had no sympathy for Republican revolutionaries like Mazzini. But he was really seeking for building interest in strengthening the state of Piedmont Sardinia. Cavour and Mazzini, though, will agree upon opposition to Austria and also the need for Italian unification of city-states. Cavour is going to want Piedmont Sardinia as the center of unification, and as a result, he'll embrace a politics of reality, which is that term Realpolitik. Realpolitik is a term that's really developed in Germany, and it's a German notion, and Otto von Bismarck will become the famous symbol for Realpolitik. But Cavour also uses this during Italian unification as prime minister. He is going to involve, for example, the Piedmont in the Crimean War just as a means of bringing up the Italian issue to those other nations, and particularly trying to get allies against Austria. Austria also gets involved in the Crimean War, but on a minor scale, and really also to try and limit both the power of the Ottomans and the power of Russia. So this is Camillo Cavour, and another player in the story of Italian unification is Mazzini. When I teach the Italian unification in my global classes, I sort of present it in a simplistic story of imagining a man. So draw a stick figure man, and there's a head, there's a heart, there's a sword, and there's a crown, right? And the crown would be Victor Emmanuel II. The head, though, the brains behind it all is Cavour, right? He's the real politique. The sword will be Giuseppe Garibaldi, who we'll talk about in a moment. But Mazzini is the heart. He is the soul of nationalism for Italy. He helped create the Young Italy, the movement, the nationalist movement in 1831. He said, if nationality is to be inviolable for all, friends and foes alike, it must be regarded inside the country as holy, like a religion, and outside the country as a grave mission. And Mazzini is a great example of the role nationalism has played in the 19th century and onward, where it really serves to replace what was once really the role of religion as a unifying force in different areas. Mazzini worked with Garibaldi in the 1850s to help fight Austria. He's also going to, in 1849, after the 1848 revolutions, he'll set up a Roman Republic as well, and ultimately that will collapse very quickly. But he is exiled out of Italy and is living in England, but his writings get passed down back to Italy, and this sense of nationalism desire really inspires many revolutionaries in Italy to want to unify as a state. So in terms of the wars for Italy, the Italian unification process really occurs in a few different phases. So in the early 1860s, first comes the unification of northern Italy. And in order for that to have occurred, you have to kick out the Austrians from this Italian peninsula. And so there is the Austro-Sardinian War, which occurs in 1859. In 1859, Cavour is declaring war against Austria, but during this time, he is going to make an alliance with Napoleon III. So Cavour, part of his realpolitik knowledge, he knows that he needs to have a force to be able to defeat that force, right? Pit power versus power in order to get Austria out of that empire. And so he wins the war, and in order to but France ends up negotiating separately with Austria. So in July 1859, at the end of the war, when Napoleon III makes a separate agreement and peace with Austrians, it really surprises Cavour. And the Franco-Austrian agreement does give Lombardy to Piedmont, but Venice still remains under the Austrian command. And also, and this is probably the greater issue at the time, they also wanted to form a federation of Italian states, which would be headed by the Pope. And so the Pope would then be the leader of this unified Italy. But rulers of throughout the revolution in Italy, the revolutionary ideas were very strongly anti-clerical, and so there's many movements against this. And so as a result of the rebellions, by 1860, the northern region of Italy becomes part of Piedmont. So by 1860, you sort of have three sections of Italy. You have the northern region, which is united under Piedmont, Sardinia. Then you'll have the Papal State region, which will be more central Italy. And then at the bottom, you'll have the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. And so you have these three different sections. It still does not look like Italy will be united. This all leads us to another man who's a major role in the Italian unification, which is Giuseppe Garibaldi. So Garibaldi is considered to be, or has a nickname of Hero of Two Worlds. He's lived a really fascinating life. He actually lived in Brooklyn for part of his life, but he's going to be a leader of independence movements in South America as well as in Italy. He helped lead independence for Uruguay in South America. And Garibaldi's movement he led a group known as the Red Shirts, and these were men who wore red shirts in the same mindset of why the British wore red shirts. If they got stabbed, you know their blood, and they would be bleeding or their weakness, and they would keep fighting and pushing forward. A very romantic notion of what honor and nationalism, national pride. But he is going to gather these groups of men, known as the Red Shirts or Garibaldi's Thousands, for an armed expedition in the south to go against Naples and to topple that monarchy. So the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, which was led by Francis II in the south, had little loyalty from its citizens. It was viewed as outsiders, and the Italians weren't open to that. And also it was viewed as a very corrupt monarchy. And so, as Garibaldi moved through the South, they encountered a lot of support from the people, but they will be facing papal forces as well as French forces. And this looks inevitably like Garibaldi will not be able to be successful, especially once he reaches the region of Rome. And facing the French army would just be a bit too much. So what Cavour is able to do, once again with that realpolitik approach, he will have the Piedmontese army join Garibaldi's force, and together they will be victorious. Now, in doing this, Garibaldi is also going to be giving his loyalty to Victor Emmanuel. Now, historically, Garibaldi was anti-monarchy. He wanted to set up a republic. But in the interest of a unified Italy, he sees it as the best possible outcome. And as a result of this, though, southern Italy will be resistant overall. They were more Republican and minded, and they'll be resistant to this Piedmontese king ruling over all of them. And so although Italy is united, there's still a clear division for much of Italian history, even today, between northern Italy and southern Italy. So in 1860, there's going to be a plebiscite where the South will join the Kingdom of Two Sicilies with Piedmont. And all regions of Italy will join through plebiscites except for Rome. And so on March 17th, 1861, the Kingdom of Italy proclaimed by a parliament with Victor Emmanuel II as king. And then Venetia will be added in 1866 from the Austro-Prussian War. And then Rome will finally be added in 1870 after the withdrawal of French troops during the Franco-Prussian War. And that is when Rome becomes a part and parcel of the rest of Italy. Now, there's still going to be some big problems in Italy. There are sections of other areas that have been given up in the interests of unifying Italy, such as in Nice and Savoy, which became part of France. And these areas still had Italians living them, and they were sort of viewed as unredeemed Italy. And the new parliament itself wasn't truly democratic until 1913, when they brought in suffrage. The North and South are still really disunited, and there's a lot of popular movements and rebellions going to happen against Italian unification. But overall, some of the key trends here, we have Cavour, Mazzini, Garibaldi as your three key men, along with Victor Emmanuel II, who will become the king. The notion of realpolitik and realpolitik and nationalism, really helping bring Italy together and unite it. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your break, and just be sure to have some notes ready for this so that we can add it to our discussion of German unification when we get back. All right, enjoy the rest of your break. Take care. Bye.